In the 4 years I've been making League content, I've always been a proponent of the idea that no amount of balance or implementation can fix a bad idea. Sure, you can try your best to work around it, but if a concept is inherently flawed, it will always be flawed, no matter how good your intentions are. Many people consider Yuumi to be one of the worst design champions to ever exist, not because she's overpowered or that she's unintuitive to play, but because she completely disregards the constraints imposed on every other champion throughout the entirety of League's history. It doesn't matter what they do with her, no one will think of her as a well-designed champion. At best, you can tune her into a state where people can tolerate her, but if that's the best you can manage out of a champion, there's something intrinsically wrong with them. One such character, who, while not the most high-profile instance, has drawn the ire and dismay of a considerable number of players ever since her release 9 years ago. An interesting concept, being the first and only controlled Juggernaut in the entire game. Sadly, there's never been a point where she isn't frustrating to be on the receiving end of, and on occasion to be playing as. Across discussion platforms, you'll find no shortage of complaints about how broken, oppressive, or stat-checky she is, having developed a reputation for quite literally 1v9 in games. Thankfully, she remained obscure for a while up until 2023 when the changes in items and other systems have greatly assisted her in consistency. But that of course resulted in more people having the displeasure of crossing paths with her more than they like. For today's Everything Wrong With episode, we'll be talking about the Kraken Priestess. Shoutouts to Dirty Mops, by the way. Let's get right to the chase. What is the central issue with Illaoi? In a similar fashion to how Smold is a marriage between two classes that cancel out each other's weaknesses, Illaoi's in more or less the same position, being a control mage who is able to threaten lots of space quickly, while at the same time being a Juggernaut who's defined by their inability to do so. Juggernauts by nature concentrate an extreme amount of pressure in a short area of effect. They're among the most difficult and dangerous opponents to fight in a head-on confrontation, having the tools necessary to easily destroy any other class archetype. The caveat, of course, is their deficiency in both attributes responsible for applying pressure easily, range and mobility, of which most of them have neither, and those who do often have limited access to it. Fighting a Juggernaut comes down entirely to playing around their range and mobility, more specifically lack thereof. It's akin to a heavyweight in a fighting game like Smash Bros. They have tremendous power to blast you to Kingdom Come, and they can also face tank more attacks than the average cast member. Defeating them necessitates that you get in, apply as much pressure as you can, then get out before they can do anything, or force a situation in which you can safely attack them while they can't do the same. Should you do so properly and continuously, you can potentially emerge victorious at no cost or threat to your life. On the other hand, a momentary lapse in judgment or calculation results in fatal consequences. Control mages prefer to spread their pressure in a large area of effect. They're actually among the least capable champions in single combat, since while they have great sustained DPS, they typically lack burst damage on par with divers, assassins, and their burst mage counterparts. But to make up for that, champions of this denomination can deal ludicrous amounts of damage to multiple targets, possessing without question the widest threat coverage in the game. They can easily top the DPS charts of any match, and can single-handedly decide the course of a team fight if executing their combo correctly. Fighting against a control aka battle mage becomes a contest of endurance, range, or speed. In other words, to beat them it requires either someone really fast, someone really bulky, or someone who can stand far enough away to outspace their opponent. Once again, it comes down to understanding how far they can reach you. Illaoi displays traits of both classes. Being a Juggernaut, she's demonstrably slow with clunky animations, some might say excessively clunky. To account for the likelihood that she'll be taking damage before she can deal it, Illaoi, like most Juggernauts, is afforded the luxury of building bruiser items, relying on her base numbers and good scaling to have equal parts offense and defense. Furthermore, being a control mage, she can render large amounts of area hazardous for the enemy team, manipulating her tentacles to attack erratically or specifically depending on the ability. It would be no exaggeration to say that the sheer amount of coverage Illaoi can have in a teamfight puts all other Juggernauts to shame, even those with presumably good coverage like Mordekaiser, Urgot, and Set. In addition, being part control mage, Illaoi excels in one field you don't expect a melee champion to: neutral. The ability to apply pressure on a target without necessarily engaging in a mutual exchange or all-in fight. Granted, her neutral game is nowhere near on the same level as that of an artillery mage, but it's sure as hell better than what the likes of Garen or Darius have, and more integral to her game plan too. Some might disagree with this next comment, but one more thing is that her one-shot faculty isn't really that great. She's a consistent attacker, as expected of a battle mage. She's not able to 100-0 you in a few hits. It requires quite a number of tentacle slaps to actually get rid of your entire health bar. Although when you are getting hit by 5 tentacles simultaneously, then it might appear to be burst damage. Hybrid champions, as in champions who can be one class or another, or both at once, not to be confused with hybrid scalers, are difficult to balance as it is. The point of champion classification is to assign concrete strengths and weaknesses to each of them that can be countered by another class. I'm aware that line has become blurred significantly in this day and age, but as a rule of thumb, you can find some semblance of a matchup triangle between classes. For instance, marksmen beat tanks, tanks beat assassins, and assassins beat marksmen. By giving a champion the privilege of two classes, you have to be extremely careful to not choose between two whose strengths cancel out the other's weaknesses. Having a hybrid between a tank and a Juggernaut like Mundo is acceptable, or maybe a mage enchanter like Seraphine, because their vulnerabilities are still present. But when you have a tank skirmisher like K'Sante or a caster marksman like Smolder, that's when it can become increasingly more problematic. Illaoi, while not the most egregious offender, definitely leans closer to problematic than fair due to her combination, Control Mage and Juggernaut, which mutually eliminate a substantial number of each other's weaknesses, resulting in polarized outcomes due to the limited agency the opponent has in dealing with her. Taking down a Control Mage demands either speed, range, or durability, and the same holds true against Illaoi. Playing someone who excels at a hit-and-run, high-mobility playstyle like Fiora, Aurora, Singed can be a solution to deal with Illaoi. Likewise, trying to play the range game by never letting her get close to you with champs like Kayle, Ken, and Vayne can also be an option to deal with her. However, durability is not. Juggernauts are notorious tank busters courtesy of their sustained DPS, high base damage, and typically a modicum of true damage, defense penetration, max health damage, or something to that effect. So if you were to try to brute force your way through, you'd be playing right into her hand, as she has % health damage and typically itemizes Black Cleaver to shred your armor. Taking down a Juggernaut mandates either range or mobility, which may appear to be identical to a Control Mage. However, both weaknesses are alleviated somewhat by her being part Control Mage. While the class does have the shortest range among the 3 mages, Battle Mages are still mages and therefore still have range. This affords Illaoi an advantage against anyone who can't consistently apply pressure from an extreme distance. She's known to have ironically favorable matchups against the likes of Gangplank, Gnar, Vladimir, and Jace, who do have range pressure but not adequately far enough range to stay out of harm's way. Not to mention, half of them eventually do have to go melee to apply most of their pressure. Tentacle Smash has a max cast range of 800, far enough to exceed every auto attack range in the game and even outrange a number of battle mages like Ryze, Vladimir, and the like. Testa Spirit has a range of 950 as well, so Illaoi's got mad reach, enough for even ranged champions to have to respect it. Then there's mobility, which alone is also not sufficient enough most of the time. Assassins, for example, might be able to dodge most of her attacks, but being a Juggernaut, Illaoi's extraordinarily hard to kill in even 2 rotations, much less 1. Then there's the issue of them having to engage in melee range to take her out, giving her a chance to strike back. Typically, high mobility champions have poor neutral games too, giving Illaoi a chance to harass them down before they find an opening to attack. And even if they do decide to go in, they have to be careful while they get out, because if she manages to tag them and test the spirit, it doesn't matter how much mobility they have, all of Illaoi's attacks become point and click essentially. So engaging in melee range is always a risk, no matter how fast or evasive you try to be. In that sense, due to her Control Mage nature, you have to fight her with equal parts mobility and range. The farther you stay away from her, the easier it is to see her attacks coming and dodge them, while also attacking her from a safe distance. This practically narrows the pool of champs with a clear advantage against her down to maybe a dozen and 2 at most, less when you account for the number of champs that you see in top lane specifically. And even if statistically speaking they have a positive win rate against her, the vast majority of them have a negative goal differential at 15 minutes, implying they can only beat her if they can endure the torture that is her lane bullying first. Moreover, even if you pick someone who can counter Illaoi, there's no guarantee the rest of your team can do the same. If the enemy team doesn't consist of extreme range pressure and/or keep away, there's a high likelihood Illaoi can still be a menace to deal with because she's a hybrid between a champion with overwhelming threat and a champion who can spread that across multiple targets. Circumstances have also evolved in a way that favors her. Even if you're playing a ranged champion with good footwork, if she purchases either Cyclosword or Iceborne, she can walk up to you, slow you down with W, then basically guarantee landing a Test of Spirit, an ability that negates whatever range or mobility advantage you think you had. Furthermore, Illaoi's been buffed in a way to address her consistency issues by making Test of Spirit more so. When she first came out, you would actually be able to lower the duration of her E if you grew a pair and fought her in spite of it. But in version 9.13 they took that away, so really if she tags you, the best option you have is to run away and break the tether, then sit around for a good 10 seconds waiting for the curse to wear off, at which point Illaoi's E cooldown would come back up and then she can repeat the cycle over and over again. Technically you can still fight her, but given she now applies a 1.5 to 2 times damage multiplier on you, you either have to be 2 items ahead of her or place someone who can one-shot her quickly before she gets to actually punish you. Realizing how frustrating it can be for the opponent if Illaoi was given easy access to her pressure, they had to deliberately design her to be slow and plodding. Illaoi has arguably the clunkiest animations in the entire game, the longest cast times across the board in terms of auto attack animation, her Q, her W, her E, and ultimate. It takes some getting used to even for Juggernaut players. At the same time, they do have to ensure sufficient agency so as to give her a fighting chance to be picked, which all champions are entitled to, but by trying to balance her in favor of one, you actively take away from the other. See, the main experiential issue with Illaoi is that she's notoriously inconsistent. Proper dodging from her opponent can make playing as Illaoi feel like an inferior version of any other Juggernaut like Darius, Mordekaiser, so what have you. However, the blade cuts both ways. If Illaoi does manage to get everything right, she has one of the highest pressure ceilings in the game, bar none. If there's one thing Juggernauts are known for, it's consistency. They're consistently strong when allowed to be, and consistently weak when not allowed to be. Illaoi on the other hand is in a weird dynamic where she's inconsistently strong when she's allowed to be and inconsistently weak when not allowed to be. So even if you think you have the upper hand on her, she might still whoop your ass. Vice versa, even if the Illaoi player thinks they're in the lead, they might not be if they miss all their stuff. It's a never-ending battle between giving her enough concessions so the person playing them feels like they have enough agency in achieving their win condition and applying their pressure, and also giving her opponent enough breathing room to dodge her attacks or attack her without exploding into a million pieces. You can't find that middle ground with her because she represents two classes that take out the weaknesses of the other, greatly stifling the number of ways you can address her. Many people believe that the root of Illaoi's frustration is Test of Spirit, since fighting her comes entirely down to whether you avoid getting hit by it or not. If you avoid it, she's objectively weaker than any other Juggernaut. If you get hit by it, she can take you on even if you have twice her golden items. The fact that most of the time the only option you have to avoid a bad outcome is to disengage doesn't really make for an interactive experience. That's only half the problem though. Every champion has that one ability where if you get hit by it, the rest is guaranteed. On paper, getting hit by Illaoi's Test of Spirit is no more binary run or die than getting hit by a Morgana Q or a Blitz Hook. The funny thing is, I was like, being a Juggernaut and also having tentacles, it would make a lot more sense and be more balanced for Illaoi's E to be an actual tentacle that grabs you and pulls you in. But you also have to account for the context of the rest of her kit. The tentacles themselves are what make everything else in her kit such a nuisance to deal with. Harsh Lesson by itself, while it does a fair bit of damage and acts as a gap closer, the real issue is that it triggers her tentacles to attack, and if you get hit by multiple of them, a single W can chunk you for your entire HP. Each of them deal unbelievably high damage on their own, having an AD ratio of effectively 140 to 150% when you account for the Q passive. Getting struck by two tentacles along with Illaoi herself is the equivalent of taking upwards of 300% AD per strike, even with the reduced damage for successive tentacles. For my money, the true problem with Illaoi is that she can fluctuate from worthless to Thanos just like that. Juggernauts are a fairly volatile class on their own, but so are control mages. Combine them together and you get one of the most volatile champions in the game. Illaoi would be much more tolerable if fighting her wasn't a checkmate scenario every other moment, because that tends to hurt her more than it helps. Back in 14.3, to account for top lane being much wider, they made it so Illaoi's tentacles get more range. This alone shot her win rate up from 49 to 51% overnight, forcing Riot to significantly nerf the damage per tentacle in response. But even then, she still came off oppressive because they made playing her more lenient. It's just too easy for her to matchup check you and spiral out of control because they designed her to be hyper rewarding if you sequence her correctly. Now in defense of Illaoi players, she can be fairly difficult to play. Unlike most other Juggernauts who you can more or less pick up and get the hang of, Illaoi takes a lot of situational awareness, especially in the realm of planning out where her tentacles spawn and how to maximize her gains. However, the experience of playing against Illaoi really sucks for most top laners, and then it can suck for the rest of the team who try to gang up on her only for her to solo 1v5. I think what Riot needs to do if they ever do plan to rework Illaoi is to flatten the curve, make her more consistent in exchange for lowering the reward she gets. Personally, I think they can rework her E to maybe instead be a crowd control tool and then allocate more of that power budget throughout the rest of her kit, because at the current moment, the matchup devolves into both players trying to put as much pressure as they can on each other without actually having to directly confront each other. Illaoi wants to harass you to Kingdom Come with Test of Spirit, while her opponent wants to poke her down without ever letting her get in range. It's the concept that's flawed, not the numbers or balance behind it. That being said, what do you guys think about Illaoi? Do you agree or disagree with my points? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. That's all for today, so if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at VarsFam, join my Discord server, and check out my other Everything Wrong With episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.